Okay, everybody, we're now going to start talking about lipids. There are 4 major macromolecules that we know, these organic carbon-based molecules that are pretty amazing but help all living things in some way maintain homeostasis, provide their structure, their metabolism. There's protection involved, energy availability, genetic material, all kinds of crazy things. So the first one we talked about were carbs. The second one is lipids. And I'm going to try to do this video in about 15 minutes. And so that way you'll be able to stop and start as you watch. So what you need to know about lipids, we can pause. I could read all of these. Basically, you need to know the types of lipids. I'm going to actually give you 5 different ones. The functions of fats for organisms. We're going to talk about what's the difference when you hear saturated, unsaturated, and even polyunsaturated. We're also going to look at what phospholipids are and their role in all cells. All cells have phospholipids. And what steroids are. They may not be what you think they are. And then what cholesterol is. All right, so here we go. So starting with lipids. Lipids, we look at root words, and so lip or lipo we know means fat. Your lip, I think of, is made of adipose tissue. So I want to put adipose tissue. Or actually fat cells. So if someone is getting liposuction, they're removing the adipose tissue from them safely. Or if they're getting injections of adipose tissue, they're going to inject them into someone's lip or wherever with cosmetic surgery. So a couple of things we know about lipids is they are an energy molecule. So they are for long-term energy, so they're not going to be metabolized so quickly like carbs. So they actually contain more energy within them. So that means more joules or more calories if we look at food energy. So basically, if you're eating a pack of Skittles, you'll look on the label and it'll have a lot less calories in a pack of Skittles than it would maybe a pack of M&Ms. And even if there's no peanuts in those M&Ms, if it's just the chocolate, we know sugar does not have fat. And so it's whatever the fat component is in the chocolate possibly is what's going to add more energy, more calories. Okay, so the monomers. The monomers of lipids, we're going to say they're fatty acids. Some people actually say, well, there's not really a true monomer for lipids. Basically, the fatty acids are these little chains here with a carbon skeleton and the hydrogens attached. You'll notice that they're straight and they have only carbons and they have a hydrogen at every bonding point. And so this makes this one actually be considered like a saturated fat. We'll look at some other diagrams in just a second. But either way, we have 3 of those and it's bonded to a glycerol backbone. It's an alcohol. So we'll also look at how do these things come together, and then when they're metabolized, they'll be broken apart from each other. Okay, so that's fatty acids. Over here in the far column, some chemical properties. They are made of 3 types of atoms, the same 3 as carbs. Some are in rings, most of them are in chains, and we know that they're nonpolar. So they hate water. They really don't want to mix in water, which makes them hydrophobic. Okay. So they're not water loving, and so they're known to be kind of waterproofing agents too. So think about the feathers on an aquatic bird. The water just rolls off its back simply because there is an oil there, and they're real oilier animals, and so it's able to waterproof their feathers. Okay, so let's look at the types. We have fats. So this is for long-term energy storage. Or insulation to keep warm, to help regulate body temperature. Also, the combination of those two help animals that hibernate to have a storage of energy from while they are in that dormant state, and also to keep them warm. Also, with insulation for those active animals that live in cold environments. So think of the polar bear and seals and walruses, and those aquatic animals in that cold water have to have layers of blubber. And in fact, a polar bear with its thick fur and its layer of fat actually is so insulated it goes undetected with like a heat sight. So they're pretty incredibly insulated. Okay, and also they cushion organs. All right, we have oil. Oh, before we do that, excuse me, I'm sorry. Let me go back. Erase this right here. Let's go ahead and list the types. So we have saturated. These are solid at room temperature. And these are animal fats. These are the ones you do not want to eat a lot of in your diet. They're actually associated with having a higher cholesterol level, and that adds, kind of lends itself to heart disease, hypertension, thrombosis with throwing a clot, stroke. So we want to decrease those. Okay, we have unsaturated. And unsaturated are actually liquid at room temperature. And these are more the oils. And these are your plant fats typically. They're better for you if you're going to, we all need some fat in our diet, so these are better for you. And then we have polyunsaturated. Okay, and they're also liquid at room temperature. Okay, we have oils. And our oils, we know, are also store long-term storage of energy. They kind of lubricate and emulsify tissue. We have oil glands that help keep us moist. Other animals do too. That kind of offer a waterproofing agent. Okay, we have waxes, which can be structurally beneficial for animals like bees when they make the wax. And for a home, we also know that they're waterproofers. And they're a protective type of substance, especially for leaves of plants. And so you'll find more of those on the top part of a leaf where they're exposed to the elements more often, and there's less typically underneath. So if the plant is maybe at risk of being exposed to a lot of heat, it may have a waxier covering. We have phospholipids. And these, I'm just going to draw, you'll see a diagram in just a second, but these are the ones that you might remember from first year biology when we're drawing the cell membrane. And they have a hydrophilic actually head and hydrophobic tails. And I know in my class I call them a balloon with two strings. And so they kind of float as part of the cell membrane. And because of this nature, they typically form two layers. So we say the cell membrane is a bilayer of phospholipids. Okay, and then our last one are steroids. Okay, steroids, we think of, anabolic steroids. And so steroids actually come in different forms. They are cholesterols. Cholesterols, typically we have some good cholesterol, but we have bad cholesterol too. And cholesterols can be found in the cell membrane of animal cells. So that's why eating animal cells, animal tissue, might be a little worse for you. You might get more fat from them, more cholesterol. And what they do is they actually act as kind of spacers in between these phospholipids and keep them from sticking together and clumping together. Plant cell membranes do not have these cholesterols. And so when we look at the cell membrane, we'll go back and refer to that and talk a little bit more about it. Also, they are hormones, like your sex hormones, estrogen, testosterone. And so we know this is a primary male and this is a primary female hormone. And so both of those are going to stimulate the development of your secondary sex characteristics, what makes you look more female or more male. And those are made by the ovaries and by the testes. And that is a decent overview, I think, of what lipids are. So let's go to the next slide and look a little bit closer at composition. All right, so we've already mentioned the composition as far as the atoms, the elements that are involved. So let's look closer at like this triacylglycerol. I always want to say it's acylglycerol. It's a mouthful. We call these sometimes triglycerides. So basically, tri meaning it has 3 fatty acids and it has a glycerol backbone. And so let's look at how this actually works and how they're bonded together. So if you look over here at the glycerol, you'll notice some hydroxyl groups. Okay, and so from those hydroxyl groups, that we know is what's going to bond to this hydroxyl group down below the fatty acid. So when we talked about in a condensation reaction or a dehydration synthesis reaction, we combine kind of the monomers to make polymers. Okay, so what happens is that the hydroxyl group of the glycerol is going to be lost. It's going to drop off, and it's going to combine here with the fatty acids, and then we're going to be left with an oxygen. And so at this point, you can see right here, so this was a fatty acid. Look at this group. That is our carboxyl group. Oops, my pen died. There we go. This is your carboxyl that makes it an acid. So it's this part of the carboxyl group that's going to bond with the hydroxyl group of the glycerol. And you'll have 3 of those interactions. What kind of bond actually forms here is right here. This is called an ester bond. And so just like we talked about glycosidic bond of carbs, now we have ester bond for lipids. So, you know, we basically, it's the same kind of thing happening. We just call it something different. And that is between an acid and that hydroxyl group. All right. And basically that's what this is showing. And I think I said that wrong just a minute ago. I think I took these two and took that hydrogen, but it's actually the other way. So this shows it differently. Okay, so either way, you know that we're gonna make water as a result. Okay. All right, so let's talk. What's the difference in saturated and unsaturated? Okay, so if it's a saturated fat, we said this is solid at room temperature. And the reason is it's saturated in hydrogen. So the carbons have their max number of hydrogens. They are saturated in hydrogens. So this is the bad fat. You want to limit this in your diet. And so it's lard, we said whole milk. This is your whole cheese made from whole milk, that type thing. And so what you're going to notice, the reason that carbon can be saturated in hydrogens is because look at all these single little lines. All these single little lines are all single bonds. Okay? And remember, carbon likes to be surrounded at 4 spots. And you see that carbon is surrounded at 4 spots. Now this is only saturated here on the fatty acid. Okay? So the fatty acid saturated. Okay, they call this monounsaturated. We can just say it's an unsaturated fat. And for this one, they're better fats for you, mainly because they don't have so many hydrogens. So a hydrogenated fat or a trans fat is not good for you. And so those are the ones that are linked more to heart disease, so not good, and stroke. So these are the better fats, the good fats, and they are liquid at room temp because they have less hydrogen. So when you look at this, there is a double bond. Well, notice if there's a double bond, it's going to automatically make it unsaturated, but this forms the kinks or bends in these fatty acid chains. Okay. All right. So example, there's olive oil and other plant oils, canola oil, grapeseed oil, sunflower oil, all those oils. Polyunsaturated is really the best kind. And it's because it has, and these are also omega-6. These have more double bonds, which kink them up even more. So let's look at a picture of that. Ooh, check this out. Okay, so saturated fat, unsaturated fat, there's a big kink. The kink really determines, where the hydrogen, the double bond is, determines kind of what the kink's going to look like. Here's trans fat that I just mentioned. And these are actually unsaturated fats that people have made hydrogenated, and that's not good for you. It's kind of a man-made hydrogenated fat, and it's not good. All right. So you'll notice they simplify this. You don't see all the carbons and all the bends, but this would be your polyunsaturated. And it has multiple bends in it. And this is an omega-3 fatty acid. And what's really great about these are the fats that actually reduce the bad fats in your blood. So these are going to reduce the triglycerides, the bad ones, by eating a good fat. So while these are going to create those blood clots, the thrombosis, the higher blood pressure, the heart disease, stroke, if you eat more omega-3, if you take fish oil, what it does is it helps to reduce that. Okay, so some of those foods that are rich in this are like tuna, salmon, trout, fish in general. Let's say you don't eat that. Chia seeds, flax. That's why you may hear people eat flax to lower their cholesterol. Well, that's why. And triglycerides are associated with those bad cholesterols. Avocado, to name a few. Even soybeans. Let's add those in there. Okay, so we have just a couple more structural things to look at. So this is that phospholipid. And we have a head end phospho because it has a phosphate group. And it has a glycerol because that's what these fats have as part of its backbone. It just has a phosphate group attached to it. This head is hydrophilic. Loves some water on the outside. But these two tails are hydrophobic. So we have a saturated because it's straight. We have an unsaturated because it's bent. And there's that double bond. Oh. Cell membranes. Okay. And this is our last slide. So we also, one of your learning targets was to talk about the structures of steroids and waxes too. So steroids, this is our ringed version of fats, which is kind of interesting. So they're found in these rings of CHO. Okay. And we mentioned earlier, they're found in the cell membrane of animal cells. And what it does is, if you have a phospholipid here, like this, and a phospholipid, and there's two layers of them, you would actually have little cholesterols in here, kind of acting as spacers so they don't stick together. So that's the fluidity. It adds to the fluidity of the membrane. And then we said they also, depending on their structure, again, it's all about the bonding and where those bonds are, and that creates these different arrangements. We said that they can be like your sex hormones. And here are just the waxes, just to show they're in a chain. It's kind of a bent chain. So y'all, that